Shabbos, Nachmu. Good luck, everyone. We're starting with Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, the very top of the page, the Mishnah. Okay, so the Mishnah says we learned a concept before in Abdallah Amud Aleph, which is called Deifa Nakuma. Literally means a crooked wall. That if you have this schach, which is disqualified, and is near the wall within 4 amos, then we say that the rest of the sukkah is kosher. If there's sufficient amount of schach kosher there, and the size of a sukkah, 3 walls, 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim, it is kosher. Why is it kosher? We imagine the wall inclines, and we have basically in the Rishonim 2 different ways of understanding pshat. Either the pasal schach now becomes part of the wall, or we imagine the wall moves over to where the kosher schach is. The entire wall is shifted over a few amos, and the entire wall now is vertical, standing next to the kosher schach. And the difference.
Does that mean that the size starts from the kosher schach, not the wall?
Sorry, say it again.
The size of the sukkah, the 7 by 7, the 7 by 4, starts from the kosher schach, or starts from the wall?
From the kosher schach. It has to be 7 by 7 kosher schach, and it has to have 3 walls. And the difference between these 2 opinions are, in the case, for example, of Dalam and Aleph, we had this schach was too high, 21 amos high, and then you built yourself a platform. And we said that the platform is within 4 amos of the wall. We imagine Deifa Nakum, it's kosher. Can you sit outside the platform, underneath the rest of the sukkah? If we learn that the wall, the schach on top, became part of the wall, then obviously it's wall. How can you sit there? But if you learn that the wall moved over, then you can sit under the rest of the schach, because it's like the schach that's extending from a kosher sukkah, which is kosher. Anyway, so let's see this Mishnah here. The Mishnah will give us 3 examples of Deifa Nakuma. Mishnah, or the way we can learn the Gemara, that's what we're talking about. If you distance the schach from the walls, if let's say there's a space, a gap of 3 tefachim from the wall, psula, it is possible. This is the proof that the Rishonim use, that the pshat of Deifa Nakuma is that the schach actually becomes part of the wall. So therefore it explains, if you have a gap of 3 tefachim, then there's no nexus between the wall and the schach on top. But if you learn that the entire wall shifts over, then who cares if there's a gap there or not a gap there? It doesn't matter. The wall is moving over to where the kosher schach is. So that's the proof that Rashi and other Rishonim bring here. That's case number 1. Okay, says the Gemara now. Case number 1, bayis shenivches. You have a house and you open up the middle of the roof. The sichech agabov, you place kosher schach on the roof. A house is not kosher for schach because it's sukkah amar rachmana. Bayis, you need a sukkah and also because tasav mina also you have to build the schach lechatchila, having in mind that it's a sukkah, or at least that it's for shade on the house. That's not what the purpose is. So im yesh min ha-kaisel l'sichach, if the distance between the walls of that room and where you place the kosher schach is greater than arba amos, psula, it is possible. But if it's less, it's all right, because we apply the rule of Deifa Nakuma. That's case number 1. Case number 2, likewise, chotzer, if you have a courtyard, shehimu kefes aksadra, you have a courtyard surrounded by a number of porches, and so therefore the walls of the houses which you're going to use towards your sukkah are not contiguous to your kosher schach, which you fill in the entire courtyard, because you have all these verandas or porches extending in front of the house that don't have a wall, and the covers of those porches are not kosher schach, again, because that it was made not for a sukkah, it was made to be a permanent thing. So again, if it's within 4 amos, it's kosher, and if not, not. Case number 3, sukkah gedolah, you have a large sukkah. In the outer perimeter, you used not kosher schach. In the middle, you used kosher schach. Im yesh tachtav arba amos psula. So he says over here is that again, if there is if there's 4 amos distance between the kosher schach and the wall, it's disqualified. So we have 3 different cases telling us the exact same principle of Deifa Nakuma. Says they want to call Hani Lamali. Why in the world do we need 3 different cases, basically telling us the same halach? Says Tzricha, we need all three cases because each one has a novelty that the other ones don't have. The Ashmin, and if we only learned the first case, which is Bayis Shenivches, a house that the roof opened up. I would have thought, you know why that is all right? Because the walls that you're counting on were meant for the interior of that room. And therefore, you can now say, well, we'll imagine that these walls have moved over, shifted over, that the not kosher part of the roof will be part of the wall. All is good. But if we go to the next case, and the Mishnah wouldn't have mentioned the next case, and I would have to try to extrapolate from the case of the house. You know what I would say? A chutzner is different. I would say that the walls of the chutzner were not meant to be used outside of the chutzner. The walls were not meant for the veranda. The walls are meant for the house. So therefore, in a case like this, where we have to have these imaginary things, maybe we cannot use the walls of the house for the sukkah, which is exterior to the house. I would say you can't use the rule of Dofen Akuma. Therefore, you need to tell us that even in the case of a chutzner, where the walls were meant for the house and the interior of the houses, we can use those walls as part of the Dofen Akuma. Okay, so why do we need a third case where you have a regular sukkah and you have pasla schach in the perimeter, and in the middle you have kosher schach? What do you need to tell me over there Dofen Akuma is effective? So I'll tell you why. Because I only knew the first two cases. I would say really the boards you're using for your house, a kosher for schach. The problem is that was made for a house and not for a sukkah. So the boards themselves inherently are all right. It's only that the wrong intention or tas v'loy minasa. Avo sukkah g'dayla, in the case of in the third case where you built a sukkah, shikifua b'dover she'ein mesachim, but you use material that should never have been used for schach. You use something that didn't grow from the ground. You use something which is mekabel tumah. So maybe over there, the schach possible. The schach that you use is disqualified schach. It's inherently no good. Maybe in that case we won't apply the rule of Dofen Akuma. We'll say the sukkah is not valid. Therefore, we need each of these cases to tell you that in all of these cases we say Dofen Akuma. And then in the Avdalud we learned over there, the Chiddush there was that you say Dofen Akuma on all four sides as well.
And isn't that a situation where they it's forgotten the word. The fact that the sukkah, the schach, is in the middle of the room, and the walls are a meter away or 2 meters away, and you make an imaginary wall, isn't that already a little bit too imaginary?
We learned that this concept of Dofen Akuma we learned earlier is halacha Moshe B'Sinai. So halacha Moshe B'Sinai says that that's good enough. If you think that's imaginary, this idea that we mentioned, we'll see tomorrow, Pitikra Yorev, and we have no walls, and we imagine our walls that's even greater imaginary. So we have the rule of Dofen Akuma, and that's good enough. In fact, the Ran says on the next page, he says that when we use imaginary rules, you cannot apply two imaginary rules. So for example, if you want to have Dofen Akuma, and then let's say the schach on top, the disqualified schach, is not actually touching the walls of your house. In other words, there's a gap. You can use the wall of your house, and then you have eaves, right, which are no good for your sukkah, and then you have a gap of 1 or 2 tfachim, which normally a gap of 2 tfachim is all right, and then you have his schach. The Ran says we will not use Dofen Akuma in that case, which is very important halacha because many poskim hold this way, because you're using two imaginary rules. You're going to have a Dofen Akuma, and you're going to have that less than 3 tfachim is lavud, and we do not use two imaginary rules. We're limited to one, not to two.
And Dofen Akuma is not a b'di'evet situation.
No, lechatchila, 100% lechatchila. There's nothing wrong with having a Dofen Akuma.
And you can't have 2 Dofen Akumas? Why?
You could have 4 Dofen Akumas, but you cannot have 2 different rules. One rule of Dofen Akuma and then another rule of lavud. Lavud means that if there's a gap, as we'll soon see, less than 3 tfachim, we imagine that it's closed off. So if you're going to have, in order to use Dofen Akuma, you need that the schach horizontally, the posel schach is coming and touching. For example, a lot of people have used the walls of their house and they have eaves on top, and then they start the sukkah, right? That eaves is possible as chach, and then you start your sukkah. You have to make sure that the chach of your sukkah is contiguous to the eaves, because if there's a space, a gap of a tefach or more, you need the rule of lavud. If you need the rule of lavud, the Ran says you can't do both.
So Rav Motel, so it could be that someone has a deck, and the deck has a timber fence with wires that would conform as a fence, that would constitute a fence using principles of lavud. But on the house end, you've got the eave. You're saying that you couldn't use that fence with the wires because of the two kula principles.
No, because you're using one principle for the wall and one for the chach. We're talking about two principles for the same effect. You need to have a kosher chach. And the problem is that the kosher chach are not connected to the wall. So you can use doifan akuma to connect them to the walls, and you can use lava to connect them to the walls. That you cannot do. Here you have one din using for the walls and another din for the chach. That's not a problem.
Okay, so we still have that. We have the doifan. What is it?
Sorry?
Doifan akuma.
Kuma, that concept, but when we have an eave, you can't sit underneath it because it's not kosher. It's not.
You
kosher.
definitely cannot sit under the eaves. No. However,
What's the point of doifan akuma?
the point is that the rest of the sukkah is kosher. A
Paul,
sukkah needs
Paul,
four walls. If you're four walls, let's say you're using, your courtyard, and you have eaves on three of the sides coming out of the courtyard, pergola, whatever it is, and you're going to use the pergola for your base to have your schach on there, and that's going to use as a sukkah, which a lot of people do. Where are your walls? Your walls have to be contiguous to the schach. So we're going to use the rule of doifan akuma. But where can you sit? Only where the kosher schach is. Not under the eaves.
What's the point of having a sukkah if you can't sit underneath it?
You're sitting under the kosher schach.
In other words, Paul, what you're doing when you're sitting under the eaves, you're not sitting in the sukkah, you're sitting under a wall, the wall is permitted to be there, but it's not permitted to be there to be regarded as a sukkah. It's regarded as a wall.
Okay, I get it, but I don't get it.
Okay, it's all right.
Rebuttal. I just clarify. It says this first case. I will sukkah g'dayla she kifua b'davish emasakim bar. That's talking about like the example of eaves. That's what exactly.
That's not eaves. No. That's not eaves. That's a normal sukkah. It's a normal sukkah, and let's say the sukkah is 4 amas by 4 amas wide, right? Or 6 amas by 6 amas wide. Right. The ends of the sukkah you used. Let's say the eaves of your, like we just said, you use the eaves of your house to be the cover, right. That part. So, and then the rest in the middle, you put kosher eschach.
Right.
In order for that sukkah to be kosher, where are the walls? The walls are outside of the kosher part of the sukkah. So if it's less than 4 amas on 3 of the sides, you have doifan akuma. It makes a sukkah kosher, but the sukkah that's kosher is only where the kosher eschach is. You cannot sit under the eaves.
So this Dovish Emasakim boy, that becomes part of the Doifan Akuma, does it?
That's exactly right.
Right. Okay.
There's a limit as to how much doifan akuma you can have.
Up to 4 amas.
Ben,
That's no different from having a sukkah and converting one of your rooms in the house. You just take part of the roof off. It's not the whole roof, but just the center part of the roof. You've got to sit under that part where the schach is.
Exactly. That's case number 1 in the Mishnah. Was the case of the house, exactly what you just said.
Right.
It seems that in those days it's quite common. Today it's not, but in those days it's quite common. Today it's pretty expensive.
Just remind you, in Daf HaChaim, you've got pictures of what this is all about. Sometimes makes it a bit easier on the internet. dafhachaim.org.
Dafhachaim.org, okay.
Yeah.
Everyone who wants to see pictures of it, look at dafhachaim.org.
Choose the Daf Yomi for today. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, everybody can hopefully visualize what we just learned. Let's continue. Now starts a lamdisha discussion. Amar Rabba, says Rabba, Ashkachetinu leRabbanan devei Rav. I once encountered the rabbis of the yeshiva of Rav. Rav was the first generation of Amoraim. His students were the second, and Rabba and Rab Chizah, they were the third. So these people were Rabba's teacher. So Rabba met some of these students, And Rabbi, if you remember, the Gemara says it's very sharp. So
Whoever's talking in the background, please mute.
Benny Slonim.
Please mute yourself, Benny. Please mute your.
I'm ringing him.
Okay. So he found the Rabbanan of Yeshiva of Rab, the Yasvi, they were sitting there, they said the following. Avir Paisel B'Shleisha. If you have a gap in your sukkah, and when we talk about a gap, we're talking about from one end of the sukkah to the other, so it's dividing your two parts of your sukkah, is pasul. Then the sukkah is pasul. Why is it? What do you mean pasul? We're talking about that if you split the sukkah widthwise, so you still have, there's a big gap there of 3 tfachim, but if you still have 3 walls remaining and schach that is 7 tfachim deep, then the sukkah, that section of the sukkah is kosher, and the 4 part of the sukkah is not. But we're talking about where the avos splits down the length of the sukkah. Remember, I told you last time, Rashi says that all the sukkahs in those days were 3 walls. Today we are machmer, we build 4-wall sukkahs. Those days, it's a hidur. Those days, they only build 3-wall sukkahs, generally speaking. So if you had an avir, a gap of 3 tvachim down the length of the sukkah, you ended up with 2 walls on one side, 2 walls on the other side, and they're split, the sukkah is not kosher anymore. So when it comes to avir, it's 3 tvachim. But when it comes to, what is it? Schach pasel, paisel ba'aba. But if you have pasel schach, if you have schach there, but it's pasel, if it's less than 4 tvachim, it's all right. You can sit there underneath it and everything else. That's just the Gemara in Daf Yutes will tell us. But if it's greater than 4 tvachim, again, down the entire length of the sukkah, we're not talking about only a small little area, then that's not a problem. You just sit all around it as kosher, it's not a problem. We're talking about the entire length of the sukkah, you have schach pasel, you need 4 tvachim. So empty space, 3 tvachim, pasel schach is 4 tvachim. As Achreinim explained, because when you have a gap of 3 tvachim, it's very noticeable. When you have pasel schach, because it blends in the rest, you don't really notice it unless it's 4 tvachim, then you see it's substantial, that looks different than the rest. That's what they said.
Pasel schach have to be sort of like in one sort of strip, because we learned before that if the majority of the schach was kosher, got 51%, then the sukkah is kosher.
That's if it's blended all together. Here we're talking about you have right down the center. Remember, we're talking about a specific case here. Right down the center of the sukkah, you have together 4 tvachim. That splits the sukkah in half. And you're left on the right side, 2 house walls, on the left side. Oh, here's a picture. What do we have here?
Have a look at 17A2. The diagrams on the right-hand side, A and B.
Okay, it's pretty clear. I mean, okay, you all have it?
Yep.
Good. Says the Gemara. So Rava says, I said to them, I don't understand. How do you know that a gap of 3 tvachim renders a sukkah possible? So you use our Mishnah here. It's not Mishnah. Here, there's a gap of 3 tvachim between the schach and the walls. Psula, it is possible. So let me ask you a question. It says in our Mishnah 4 amis. So the way Rabbah understood our Mishnah makes no. Rabbah says nowhere does our Mishnah mention the word doifen akuma. No such thing as doifen akuma. Our Mishnah is telling us a general rule when it comes to disqualified schach. It needs to be 4 amas before it passes the sukkah. So if just like you learn from the Mishnah 3 tvachim of empty space passes the sukkah, so too you should learn 4 amas of pasal schach passes the sukkah, not 4 tvachim. So he says the same thing. Our Mishnah is chach pasal amas. Our Mishnah also, you should learn from our Mishnah that if you have pasal schach, it should only be if we have 4 amas of pasal schach together that it renders the sukkah pasal. Why? Now we learned in our Mishnah clearly. Bayis a house, shenivches are opened up. The sichich hagabav, you place chach on top of that room. Im yesh bein hasichich lekoisel dal damas. If you have 4 amas together of pasal schach, so it's pasal. So in other words, what do we see clearly from our Mishnah? I don't believe in doifen akuma, and therefore, what do you see in our Mishnah clearly? That pasal schach of 4 amas renders the sukkah pasal. They told me, my teachers told me, bar minodahi. Ignore our Mishnah. What are you talking about? They said, you don't understand Pshat in the Mishnah. 4 amas is not because 4 amas is qualified. Normally it's 4 tvachim. Why does the Mishnah say 4 Amos? Because we're talking about near the wall. The Rabbi Shmuel both Rav and Shmuel said 2 days ago when we were arguing about these boards, has to do with Deifin Akuma. So therefore, what are they telling me? They say I'm wrong. Open space 3 tvachim. Paslas chach is 4 tvachim. Why does our Mishnah say 4 Amos? It's talking about on the side of the sukkah. There we can use the wall as say that the schach is part of the wall. Up to 4 Amos, we will use the rule of Deifin Akuma. That's what they said to me. He's repeating the entire conversation that he had with his teachers. I said to them, Ma ilu. Let me ask you a question. What would be? This is like a new question. What would be? Let me ask an interesting question. Ma ilu ikas chach posel. Which is stricter? It's clear whether like you, whether like me, which is stricter. What's stricter is open space, because open space disqualifies a sukkah 3 tvachim. Chach posel disqualifies a sukkah 4 tvachim. So it's clearly that an open space, avir, is stricter than chach posel. So let me ask a very simple question. What happens because chach posel pachas mabor? Let's say if you had posel chach 3.5 tvachim. If you had posel chach that's 3.5 tvachim, the sukkah is still kosher. Then the avir pachas mishloish, and right next to it you had open space of 2 tvachim. Yeah, what are you going to tell me? The sukkah is kosher, because as far as open space is concerned, it's less than 3, and as far as what do you call it? As far as paslas chach, it's less than 4. But let me ask you a question. My shade is kosher. Okay, let's think this through logically. According to you guys who say that 4 tvachim disqualifies paslas chach, malya bishpudim. So I go over to the open space. Right, I have 3.5 tvachim of paslas chach, 2 of open space. I take a tefach more of paslas chach, and I fill that open space, and I put 1 more tefach of paslas chach. So what do I have now? I have 4.5 tvachim of paslas chach, right, and 1.5 tvachim open space. And you're going to go scream, my sukkah is pasal. It doesn't make sense. Before I put the paslas chach, there was open space, which is stricter than having paslas chach, and yet my sukkah is kosher. And now that I fill it with paslas chach, which is more lenient, suddenly my sukkah is pasal. The whole thing doesn't make sense. And he's saying to them like this: you believe that, where do you get this idea of 4 tvachim? 4 Amos is Allah. Where do you get 4 tvachim from? 4 tvachim, you think in logic, because 4 tvachim is a chash of a space. In the laws of Shabbos, we know we have to have 4 tvachim. So if 4 tvachim is a logical thing, it doesn't make sense. Tell me the logic of what I just said. So he said, malya bishpudin, if I took, let's say, I added to the 3 tvachim or 3.5 tvachim of paslas chach, and I added another tefach of paslas chach, my psula. You can tell me it's possible. Does that make sense? You're basing yourself on logic, and what you're saying that doesn't make sense. Why? So how can it be that open space, avir, which disqualifies a sukkah with 3 tvachim of open space? So it's so strict, and yet the sukkah will be kosher if it's only 2 tvachim. But the moment I fill one of those 2 tvachim with paslas chach, I ruin the whole sukkah. It doesn't make sense. That's what he's asking them. But Amruli, they said back to me, so how come you're any better? And I learned, they said back to me very simple. So their retort was, I say it's 4 Amos. Why don't you ask the same question? What happens if you have 3 Amos and 5 tvachim, and 1 tefach short? The sukkah is kosher. If I have right next to it 2.5 tvachim of open space, the sukkah is kosher. But if I take one of those tvachim of open space and I convert it and I put in there, I fill it with paslas chach, the sukkah is possible. Same question. And how can it be that paslas chach should be stricter than avir? What are you asking on us? What does that do with us? The same question can be applied to you. But Amrli, they said, if so, according to you, you say chach pasal plays by Amos. What's the difference 4 tvachim 4 Amos? Okay, Rabbi, you say it's 4 Amos. The same question. What happens if you have, let's say, 3 Amos and 5 tvachim of chach pasal? But avir pachas mishloish, you have open space that's 2.5 tvachim right next to it, alongside it. My shada, it's kosher, right? Yet malya bishpudin, you took one of the tvachim of the open space and you filled it with pasal chach. My psula, it is possible. How can it be? How can it be that the avir, the open space, which normally requires 3, which means that why it's so strict? Shouldn't that be chach posel? A place by amas shouldn't it be stricter than chach posel? So if you have 2.5 amas of open space next to 3 amas and 5 tvachim of chach posel, it should pass on the sukkah. It doesn't. But what's the logic in that? So the same question you're asking us. we can ask back to you. What do you want from us?
What's going on here with all the Amos and the Tfachim? I'm not really sure what's in Amos and what's in Tfachim here. How are we going?
Very quickly, according to the students of Rav, they say open space down the center of a sukkah, if it's 3 tefachim wide, it ruins the entire sukkah. Anything less than that, it doesn't. We say lavud, it's closed off. But if you have pasel schach along the length of the sukkah, it has to be 4 tefachim before it renders the sukkah pasel. That's what they say. Rabbah disagrees. He says when it comes to pasel schach, it has to be 4 amas before it renders the sukkah pasel. Because he says 4 amas is the shear. The Mishnah clearly talks about 4 amas. Nowhere does it say 4 tefachim. It's your own imagination. In other words, you came up with some logic, doesn't make sense. And then he says, I'll show you how your logic doesn't make sense. Because you're saying 4 tefachim because you think that's a chash of a place. Okay, so let me ask you a question. You have 4 tefachim, you have 3.9 tefachim of pasel schach, and you have 2.9 tefachim of open space neighboring each other. It's not a problem. The sukkah is kosher, right? Yet if I took that point, one of a tefach, and I put a pasel, another pasel, a piece of schach there, suddenly you have now 4 tefachim of pasel, the whole sukkah is pasel. How can that be? Which is stricter? Open space is more severe, is more of a problem to a sukkah than pasel schach, because open space 3 tefachim ruins the sukkah. Pasel schach needs 4 tefachim, right? And yet, if you have open space next to pasel schach, if they're both less than the shear, it doesn't ruin the sukkah. And the moment you take some of that open space and you fill it with pasel schach, it ruins the sukkah. That means, how can that be? How can pasel schach be more stricter than open space?
Can I ask though, if you have pasel schach and you have pachas mikashir and you have pachas mikashir of avir, aren't you again combining 2 kulas? Yeah. It's pachas mikashir, so we make a kula, we say, okay, it's not a shir, we let you get away with it.
No. We're talking about that you still have, it's talking about a large sukkah here. We're not talking about a small sukkah, 7 tefachim. We're talking about a big sukkah, and so therefore it's only a problem because of the halacha of pasel schach of open space, not because the sukkah doesn't have the shear. And it's nothing to do with kulas. Each din is separate. There's 2 separate dinim. There's one din regarding pasel schach. It's another din regarding avir. That's nothing to do with each other. Avir only pasels when you have 3 tefachim. Less than 3 tefachim, we say lavud. According to most of Farshim, because the lavud, others say it's not even pasel. Pasel schach does not pasel less than 4 tefachim, according to Tamid de Rav. So and why? Because it's logic. 4 tefachim is a chashuv amount. And so therefore, if it's pasel, it's like a space of its own, just like Shabbos. 4 tefachim means it's a separate reshus. So 4 tefachim of pasel schach is a separate schach, has nothing to do with the other schach, it's unaffiliated, and therefore it ruins the entire sukkah because it's split down the middle. So Rabbah says if it's all based on logic, it doesn't make sense.
What has that got to do with Amos?
What?
What has that got to do with Arba Amos?
1 second, I'm getting there. So that's what Rabbah said to Rav, to Tamid Rav. Come along, Tamid Rav said to him, your opinion just makes as little sense as our opinion. Because your opinion is, when does the sukkah become pasel? How much chach pasel does it have to be? Michael.
4
amas.
4 tefachim.
That's not Rabbah, that's Tamid Rav. Rabbah holds that in order to pasel a sukkah, it needs 4 amas of pasel schach. You follow? So therefore, they're saying back to Rabbah. So you're telling us it's 4 amas of pasel schach, 3 tefachim of open space. So let's ask you the same question. You have 3.95 tefachim of pasel.
Oh, I get it now. Okay, yeah, I got it. It just clicked.
Okay. So Rabbah then responds back. This is like a very interesting pilpul in the Gemara discussion here. So Rabbah answered back to his teachers. You're wrong. He says to them, fundamentally, the difference between my view and your view is like this. If I say 4 amas, because that's the shear. Halacha l'Moshe Messina, you need 4, you need 3, whatever, 3 walls or 2 walls and a bit. You need 7 by 7. Should be high. All that halacha l'Moshe Messina, including that schach pasel ruins the sukkah by 4 amas. You came along and said 4 tefachim. There's no basis for that. It doesn't say anywhere halacha l'Moshe either. So that's pure logic. If you're basing yourself on logic, I got a problem because the question that I asked you. I'm talking about a shear. Because I'm talking about a shear of 4 amas, I cannot combine a shear of 3 tefachim of open space, which is halacha Moshe Sinai lavud, and a share of 4 amas of Mashina, you can't combine the two. That's the law. Don't ask any questions. The law is 4 amas of Paslas Chach ruins a sukkah, 3 Tvachim of Obotel sukkah, and therefore you don't like the fact that 3.95 amas will not pass the sukkah alongside 2.95 Tvachim. So what? That's the halacha Mashina. Don't ask many questions. But you're approaching it from a logical standpoint. It doesn't make sense. Let's just see inside the words.
Rabbi says that halacha l'Moshe Mishnah is 4 amas of Paslas Chach. Are they rejecting that? Talmidei Rav rejecting the halacha l'Moshe Mishnah?
Of course they are. They're saying 4 Tvachim. And it's only logic. Okay. Because nowhere does the Mishnah say 4 Tvachim. The Mishnah always says 4 amas. Except they say whenever the Mishnah says 4 amas, it means Deifan Akuma. The Mishnah doesn't mention Deifan Akuma. Okay, let's just finish the pulpul. If anyone else has questions? Okay, let's just finish the pulpul. So he continues. 2 lines to the bottom. And I answered him back. Hi, my. What are you asking me about my 4 amas if it's contiguous open space? According to me, I say arba amas mishum shiur. I say that arba amas is a sheer halacha l'moshe mesina. That's how it is. The lav shiuru, and if it's more than 4 amas, or less, if it's a shear, if it's less than 4 amas, it's not the shear. It doesn't passel it. High lav shirus. If it's 3.95 amas of paslas chach, it didn't reach the shear that disqualifies the sukkah, and that's end the story. Doesn't matter if right next to it is avir. That's a separate law, separate shear. Because the shiurim are different, the 2 separate rules. You can't blend 2 rules and say, okay, let's add the 2.5 tvachim of avir to the 3.95 of pasal and render the sukkah pasal. You can't do that because it's 2 different laws, 2 different shiurim. But you, the Amrita, you say shir mishum hafloga. Your shir is not because Allah Sinai. Your shir is because that's a chashuv amount. Mali is palig b'schak pasal, mali is chag b'schak pasal ba'avir. If it's because of the chashuv amount and 4 tfachim, that's what you're saying, tfachim. Not because Allah Sinai, but because 4 tfachim is a chashuv area, and therefore it's like a separate area, splits the sukkah in half. Then logic should say that 3.9 tfachim of pasal chach and a little bit of avir together also renders the sukkah pasal. That's what he's asking them. Abaye gets involved in the picture. So obviously, Rabbah told this over to his students, to Abaye and Rabbah, the conversation that he had. So Abaye jumps at his teacher and he says, I don't understand. Even according to you, the rule is going to be that if they ever have if 2 different laws ever have any overlap, then you can mix the 2 laws together in every instance. So since I'm going to prove to you, that the law of paslas chach and the law of open space have an overlap, they both have the same shear in a certain instance, therefore they should always be able to be combined. Where do they have the same shear? This is 4 tfachim, that's 3 tfachim. I'll tell you where. So Abaye says, according to you, teacher, my teacher, Nami, true, when it comes to a large sukkah, you're right. Paslas chach, you need 4 tfachim. Ava, you need 3 tfachim. But the sukkah tan, if you have a sukkah, it's only 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim, or others say 9.5 by 9.5, but 7 by 7 tfachim, mi loy shavu shiurayu. If you have a sukkah exactly 7 tfachim, if you have 3 tfachim, less than 3 tfachim of space, we say love it, no problem. But if it's more than 3 tfachim, the sukkah is possible. If you have 3 tfachim of paslas chach, the sukkah is also possible. Why the sukkah possible? Because you don't have a kosher shear left anymore. So therefore, because they have the same shear by a sukkah tana, then even in a sukkah gdoila where the din is here's 4 tfachim and here's 3, you should, if you're short, if this is only 3.5 tfachim, you should be able to combine a tefach of the open space, and together now, well, we have more than 4 tfachim of psul, it should ruin the whole sukkah.
Where's the position? Where is the states now? Where are you?
Okay, so
17b1, right hand column, 2nd paragraph.
Okay, so right now Abaye thinks the reason why schach posel and 3 tfachim in a small sukkah and avir are the same thing is because they both have the same shear when it comes to a small sukkah, and since they both have the same laws when it comes to a small sukkah, so even though in a larger sukkah we say okay we'll tolerate up to 4 tfachim of posel schach, but they should be able to combine because in one place they have the exact same halachas. So they should be able to combine, because in other words, they're related to each other. So in a large sukkah, if you have 3.5 tefachim of puzzle and 1 tefach of open space, put them together and say it's puzzle. That's what Abai asks his teacher. So we have a problem. So he says to Amalei, so Rabbi answers back. In other words, what are you telling me that 4 amas? I have no problem because 4 amas is 1 shear. And Av is another shear, but Abai says, but in a Sukkah Tana, they have exactly the same shear. Amalei Rabbi said, not because they have the same shear. A small Sukkah, not because they have the same shear. The lesser the shear of the Sukkah. The problem there is you don't have any more sufficient amount of kosher schach to be a kosher Sukkah. That's the problem. Nothing to do with being the same shear. They never have the same shear. And that's why I had a good answer to my teachers, because 4 amas is 1 shear, 3 tfachim is another shear, and therefore they don't combine. But my question to them was 4 tfachim and avi should join together, which obviously they disagreed, but that was my question. Says the Gemara further. So what do you tell me? For you, Rabbi, saying because this is 4 amas and open space is 3 tfachim, therefore they can never combine. You can't mix the two together. I'll show you in the laws of Tumah they do combine. But now we learned that when it comes to a material, there's a tumah called tumas midras. Tumas midras is if a zav or a zava, if someone has emissions and so on, becomes tameh, then if they're sitting on something or standing on something, that becomes tameh and takes on the same level of tumah that they have. But it has to be a size that is suitable to sit. So we say it depends what the material is. Habeged, when it comes to material of a beged, is shloisha al shloisha. When we're talking about to tumas midras, where the tumah is the same level as the person making it tameh, then it has to be 3 tfachim by 3 tfachim. As a general rule, whenever you learn Gemara, how do you know if we're talking about tfachim or we're talking about, something else, amos or fingers? So you look at it, if it's masculine or feminine. In odd, but in Hebrew, when it comes to the numbers, the hey at the end, which usually is feminine, actually is masculine. So shloisha is masculine. So then we know we're talking about tfachim, which is masculine. If you would say shalosh al shalosh, it would either, depending on the context, would either be which is feminine, would either be amos or it would be etzbois. In this case, it's not amos; it's massive. So it's talking about fingers. So shloisha. So a beged normally is 3 fingers by 3 fingers with the size, because that's what poor people use, but not for tumas midras. Tumas midras is different than other tumas. It's not a generation lower. Takes on the same status of tumah as the person who made the tummy, and therefore it has to be something where you can sit on. So it has to be 3 tfachim by 3 tfachim. What about that's material hasak? If it's made out of feathers from a goat, then arba, it's 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. If it's made out of hide, it's chamisha al chamisha, 5 by 5. Mephith, if it's a mat made out of reeds, it's shisha al shisha, 6 by 6. Okay, each one has a different shear. And yet, v'tanei Allah, we learned, habeged v'hasak. If you take a beged and a sak, 3 tfachim or 4 tfachim, they know it. If you have a sak, it's supposed to be 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, but only has 3. But the rest of it, the last tefach, you use the other material of a beged. They combine, even though they're different shiurim. Or hasak v'ha'oyer, they combine. Or oyer v'hamefet, they combine. Mistarfin zemzeh. So we see clearly from here that even things which have different shiurim combine. So why can't the avir, even according to you, the avir combine with the schach puzzle to make it puzzle? So we answer. So Rabbi says you're wrong. Hasam again. Hasam kiritani time. But the reason is, you know why? Because there is certain cases where they have the same shear. And if in one instance they have the same shear, that means they are related to each other. They can always combine. When do they have the same shear? What's the reason? Because they can combine in order to sit. If now we learned tefach al tefach. If you cut out from any one of them, the size of a tefah by a tefach. If you cut out the 7 by a tefach, it's tameh. Why? Tefach tefach my chazi. Knows any one of these materials. If you cut out the size of a tefach by a tefach, that's one way of learning. Or if you mix all 4 materials together and you make it into one tefach, it is suitable to mikabel tuma also. When? L'may chazi. What is it? What can you do with it? If you have a donkey and it has a saddle, and the saddle needs a patch, then you can put a patch. The minimum size of a patch is 1 tefah by 1 tefach, and the rider will sit on top of it. So therefore, even a tefah by a tefach of any one of these can be suitable. So because there is one instance where they all have the same shear, therefore they can combine they can all combine with each other. But on the other hand, when it comes to 4 amas and 3 tfachim, they never have the same shear. In the Sukah Tana, it's not because of the shear, but because you don't have a kosher sukkah. Anyway, says the Gemara, in Surah, they learned the Gemara exactly the way we just said it right now. However, in other words, Tamid the Rav say that it's 4 tfachim in the middle of Sukkah, and Rabbah says that it's 4 amos. However, in Adoi, they learned it very differently. There they learned as follows. Rabbi Yehuda said, name of Shmuel. Remember, we had an argument before between Rav and Shmuel about boards. If you place boards on the schach of a sukkah, and we had an argument with Rabbi Yehuda, where Rabbi Meir says, I don't want you to use these big boards because next time you'll think you can use it and you can sit on the house. And Rabbi Yehuda is not worried. So we had an argument with Rav and Shmuel. According to Rav, any board less than 3 tfachim you can use for your sukkah. Boards that are 4 tfachim and wider is an argument. Rabbi Meir says don't use it because boards in your house are generally 4 tfachim. Next time you'll sit in your house. And Rabbi Yehuda says no problem. Shmuel says no. Everyone agrees boards 4 tfachim you shouldn't sit under. They're only arguing about boards less than 4 tfachim, between 3 and 4. Less than 3 is just like sticks, but between 3 and 4, that's where the argument is. Where Rabbi Yehuda says that there's no problem, and Meir says there's a problem. We had that whole discussion before a few days ago. So the Gemara says here that Yehuda said name of Shmuel, Schach Posel. Now what Shmuel saying it. That Shmuel said, in the middle of the sukkah, 4 tfachim renders it possible. So Shmuel says the way we learned, the way Tamid the Rav learned, which is that the side of the sukkah we have Deif and Akumas up to 4 amas. The middle of the sukkah, down the middle, it's 4 tfachim. But the Rav is the one who argues, not the Rabbah, but the Rav. Rav holds that no such thing as Deif and Akuma. That is the law of Pasal Schach. You have up to 4 amas. Says the Gemara, Tanan, we learned this in the Mishnah before. Nosan oleh nese, if you place on it a board, shurach of arbet tfachim, that's 4 tfachim wide, shade is kosher. It says if you place a board that's 4 tfachim wide, it is kosher. Bishleim l'Rav. So right now we think that this board is right in the center of the sukkah. Right? You place a 4 tfachim board, it is kosher. Now, how can it be kosher? According to Shmuel, that says 4 tfachim renders a sukkah possible. How can the Mishnah clearly say that if you have a board 4 tfachim, the sukkah is kosher? Isn't that a problem? So Bishleim l'Rav Domer says, Bein be'emtza.
Sorry, when you sit in the sukkah and something is possible, like we're talking about now, does that mean is that at all relevant in terms of where you sit? Can you still sit under a possible part of the sukkah because it's okay?
No. Good question. On Daf Yud Tes Amud Aleph, wait till there. The Gemara is going to discuss if you have Pasal Schach in your sukkah, which does not render your sukkah Pasal. Right? Let's say you have Pasal Schach 3 tfachim wide, Pasal, which then is the sukkah still kosher. Are you allowed to sit under that Pasal Schach and eat? The Gemara Daf Yud Tes will talk about. Let's say you have open space 2.5 tfachim, which the sukkah is kosher. Are you allowed to sit under that open space and eat? Okay, the Gemara Daf Yud Tes. So wait 2 days, you will learn it. You'll see it. It's discussed right there. So now, now the Mishnah.
But so far, it sounds as though you could.
No. I didn't say that. Wait till
I know you didn't. I'm saying logically, if the sukkah is kosher, if that's okay, and you should be able to sit there.
Could be, but I'm not telling you what the Gemara. I'll leave you in suspense.
Okay,
but it could be that the Gemara, that the rest of the sukkah is kosher, just not underneath that posel schach. What we're talking about here is that it disqualifies the entire sukkah because going down right down the center of the sukkah from one end to the other end. So it breaks your sukkah into two halves.
If you could tell me now, I could miss that shear. That's all.
No, I'm not going to tell you. I want you to go learn it. So you'll see that few tests.
Looking forward to it.
Okay.
Only 2 days.
Exactly. Tanam, we learned nothing to learn that. So the question is, it says clearly in the Mishnah, you place the board that's 4 tefachim wide. So it says here, kshed is kosher. Now, according to Rav, who says, I don't care where in the sukkah it is, forget Doif Nakuma. Poslas Chach does not disqualify a sukkah unless it's 4 amas. We have no problem with that Mishnah. So what if the board is 4 tefachim? No problem. My problem is Shmuel. He holds he holds at the middle of the sukkah where there's no wall, no Doif Nakuma. A 4 tefachim piece of metal ruins the entire sukkah. So why is the Mishnah say Ksheder? I might Ksheder, why is it kosher? So the answer is very simple, like we read here before. When the Mishnah says if you have a 4 tefachim board, the sukkah is kosher, it's talking about that it's what? On the side next to, it's within Doif Nakuma. Okay, Toshma, another thing that we learned in that same Mishnah, it says
saying Doif Nakuma is arba amas.
Exactly. So if you have a board 4 tefachim, the sukkah is still kosher. Why? Because Doif Nakuma. And just don't sit there, that's all.
So we hold that Doif Nakuma is arba amas. That's the maskana.
Right. Up to 4 amas, yes. Correct. And we hold that in the middle of the sukkah, not everyone agrees, but we paskin halach and shalach is a big machlekes that 4 tefachim, we paskin like Shmuel and like Talmidei the Rav. That's 4 tefachim. But in the Rishonim,
which is why you can go to people's home and there's this huge gap between the wall and the schach they put in the lounge room.
I told you, up to 4 amas is not a problem.
I've got a Doif Nakuma.
Yeah, up to 4 amas.
And we had a Rav to look at it, and he said it's less than 3 amas, and so it's kosher.
Exactly. So less than 4 amas, no problem. Just that we want to make sure this chach actually comes all the way to the eaves. Shouldn't be gaps, because then there's a big problem.
What's an amma is about half a meter, is it?
An amma, it's in inches. It's either 18 inches, 1.5 feet, or 22 inches. So what does that work out in meters? You work it out.
Who knows? Anybody done?
It's about the length of your forearm and hand.
Speaking inches or centimeters, no, half a meter is 50 centimeters. What is that? Well, very simple. 2.56 inches is 50 is an inch. So 18 times 2.5 is roughly about 45. Yeah. So it's roughly roughly half an amma. Half an amma is roughly an amma is roughly a half a meter.
22 inches is 55 centimeters.
Okay. So there's 3 opinions. Ramosha says 22, others say 18, others say 21.5. All over the place. Okay. Tashma, come in here. In that very Mishnah it says, Shnei Sadinin, you have 2 sheets. Mitzdarfin, if you have 2 sheets, sheets are possible schach because they are mekabel tum. So they mitzdarfin, they combine, and if together they reach a certain amount, it passes the sukkah. Shnei nesarim, if you have 2 boards, ein mitzdarfin. Rabbi Yehuda says 2 boards do not combine because according to Rabbi Yehuda, every board is kosher. If a board is 3 tefachim, every board is kosher. 3.5 tefachim, so you can have 20 boards combined to what? Every board individually is kosher. So they're all there together, no problem.
But that can be used as walls.
Sorry?
But they can be used as walls, even though they're mekabel tuma.
What are you talking about? Boards?
We're talking about the walls of a sukkah can be material.
Yeah, but we're talking about the schach. Everything we're talking about is schach.
I understand that, but I'm just saying, but for the purposes of a wall, it's okay.
We will learn later in the beginning, you'll learn later in the second parak, there's another concept called davar hamaimid, which means that even though it's a wall, if your schach is sitting on something, and this is very important, that which is holding up the schach also has to be similar to schach. It should not be davar mekabel tumah. In other words, you shouldn't have a metal frame and place a schach on the metal frame, even though you're relying on your schach, but the thing that's holding up the schach, which is called davar hamaimid, is possible schach is a problem. You'll see that in the next parak. And then they have Rabbanim who came out further and said a maimid of a maimid is a problem, which we won't go that far. But that's very important. The Dover Maimed has to also be, in other words, you put the schach on wood rather than on metal, for example.
Is a board makabel tuma?
A board is flat. We have a rule. Pshute kleyates. Wood, if only time wood is makabel tuma if it's a receptacle. When it comes to metal, even a flat piece of metal is makabel tuma. Wood, pshute kleyates is not makabel tuma. Only if it has a clay kibble. We learned that before about those arrows. Remember the chitzim? It's only if it's in a cave, so it has a receptacle, then it's a problem. But if it's just a flat thing with a peg sticking out, no problem.
If I go and buy a 2x4 from Penhalirix, that's not makabel tuma.
No. We had an argument if it's a very smooth, polished board. Remember Shufin? We had an argument there whether it's makabel tuma or not. But
are you saying that if the whole structure is made out of metal, you can't use that to put a schach on it?
Put a piece of wood on top of the metal, and then on top of that, you put the schach.
Every sukkah in Israel is like that.
I don't know. I'm not telling you. Here's Moshe. What does it say?
What they do is those sukkahs, to support the frame, they put a metal across, like a cross beam, but you always have wood on top of it to put the schach.
Exactly. You always put something. The schach should be sitting on the wood, not directly on the metal. You'll see. You'll get to the second paragraph. You'll see. The tree, the sukkah in the tree.
We're just learning that sheets are makabel tuma instead of if it's used as schach. But if the sheets are used as a wall, why is that not makabel tuma?
It is, but we don't care. We hold that when it comes to the wall, we don't care what the material it is. We don't follow that opinion that says that the same rule that applies to schach apply to the walls. Remember, there's an opinion. We don't follow that. We hold that the walls can be made out of rocks, out of brick. The walls can be made out of any material. This is schach that we are concerned with, all of these rules. Because Rashi told us, sukkah is called sukkah al shem schach. It's all about the schach.
So we're not concerned if the walls are makabel tuma?
No. We're not considered whether the gedule karka, makabel tuma, no. None of that. Okay, let's continue. So, a mayor comes along and says, no, the sarim kisadinin. A mayor comes along and says that in the sarim, the planks have the same thing like the sadinin, like these sheets that two of them will combine together. That's what a mayor says. Now that if you have two that combine to the shear that's puzzle, it disqualifies the sukkah. Now let's understand what we're talking about. According to this lashon that we're learning right now, the Amar Rav, that the Rav says, Bein be'emtza, Bein min hatzad. Now remember, Rav holds that the whole argument of Yehuda Meir is only if the boards are 4 tefachim wide. So we're talking here about boards that are 4 tefachim wide. And you're telling me that if you have two boards 4 tefachim wide, they're like sheets and they combine. Now, why do you need them to combine? If you hold that a 4 tefachim piece, a puzzle disqualifies the sukkah, then why do I need it to combine to anything else? Remember, Rav learns that the whole argument of Yehuda Meir is only boards that are 4 tefachim wide. So if you have a board that's 4 tefachim wide, the Meir holds puzzle. Why does the Meir say, and they combine? For what purpose? So if you hold that Rav holds, Bein be'emtza, bein min hatzad, ba'arba amas. You tell me, we need 4 amas to disqualify a sukkah. Now I understand. My mitzdarfin. In other words, even though you have a board that's 4 tefachim wide and it's possible, but so what? The sukkah is still kosher. In order to render the sukkah possible, it has to combine with a bunch of other boards to make it 4 amas, and therefore the sukkah is possible. I understand. Mitzdarfin the dal amas. Ela hachlisha. The other way we learned Amarav be'emtza ba'abo. The first way we learned that Tamid the Rav, which means Rav himself, held that you need 4 tefachim in the middle disqualifies the sukkah. So if you have a board that's 4 tefachim, a mayor would hold that the sukkah is possible. So why does a mayor say it combines? For what purpose? What do you have to combine? So what are you going to tell me? Maybe the boards that the mayor is talking about are 3.5 tefachim wide. If it's 3.5 tefachim wide, the kosher boards according to Rav. Then either less, which I lost. Yeah. Hey, what are you talking about? If they're 4 tefachim wide, what do you have to combine them? And either less budal, they're not 4 tefachim wide. It's just boards. It's sticks. So you can have 100 sticks. They're all kosher. So how do you understand pshat? Doesn't that prove that Rav must hold its 4 amas, like the second version? Second, but no, doesn't prove anything. La'olam the izbuhabo is talking about that is 4 tefachim. Talk about 4 tefachim. But what did we tell you before? That in the middle is 4 tefachim, but on the side you need 4 amas. And he's talking about the side. And what Ameir says that if you have 4 tefachim, it will combine just like sheets to passel. He was talking about on the side where you need 4 amas. Minus that on the side. Okay, Toshma coming here. Another proof. It says this brisa here is what we used before to prove that Shmuel is right. It says sichacha ben nesarin shel eres. If you use chach board made out of cedar wood, sheyesh behen dalid that have 4 tefachim of width, divrei hakol psula. Everyone agrees that's possible. And we used in the Gemara before a few days ago that this brisa supports Shmuel that holds that 4 tefachim. Everyone agrees it's possible. The whole argument is between 3 and 4. Okay. Ein behen dalid, if it's less than 4. Rameir says possible. Rameir says possible. And Rabbi Yehuda is machir, is kosher. And this is exactly how, what do you call it? Shmuel learned before. And yet, Rameir concedes all those that he says possible, whether it's 3 tefachim, whether it's 4 tefachim, im yesh bein nesel and nesel kemoli nesel. In between each possible board, you have an equal space, and you fill it with kosher schach. Shemaniach pesel b'neim, you put kosher schach in there. Kosher schach, we use the word pesel. Pesel is because the remains of, remember we learned the pasuk, the asvacha megorencha mikvecha. We learned now that the leftovers of your threshing floor and your wine, that's where you learn out that that's material use for schach. So we always use the pesel. Pesel is psoilus, the leftover, the residual. So if you then have pasel boards, and then between each one you have an equal space, and you put in there kosher schach, uksheda and is kosher. That's what Meir says. Now, the one who says, and again, that the sukkah becomes kosher. You have alternate one board pasel. A very simple question. If you hold that. One says that whether it's the beginning or the end it's 4 amas mishum hachik sheda. That's why it's kosher. Why is it kosher? You have a 4 tefachim board that's possible, a 4 tefachim schach that's kosher. You have 4 tefachim board, but who cares? Because remember, the sukkah does not become possible according to the second version only if it's 4 amas, even in the middle. Okay, I understand how this is possible. The one holds that in the middle of the sukkah it has to be 4 tefachim. How can it be kosher? If you have a board that is 4 tefachim, Rameir says that any board, 3 tefachim, 4 tefachim, if you alternate 4 tefachim of pastel, 4 tefachim of kosher is kosher. So I have a simple question: how can the sukkah be kosher if right in the middle you have a 4 tefachim board of pastel? It moves the whole sukkah. You know we're talking about a case. I'll tell you where it's kosher. A sukkah that has 8 amas exact. Askin. So this is what you did. So 8 amas. So you have 8 amas. 8 amas has 48 tefachim, right? So each side is 4 amas. An amma is 6 tefachim. So if you start with the yoyiv, if you put a pasel board. That's 4, then kosher, pasel, kosher, pasel, kosher. So that's 6 different boards. 3 of them are kosher, pasel. That makes up 24 tefachim. That's 4 amas on one side. And he did the same thing on the other side. So in the epicenter of the sukkah, what you have is 2 sets of 4 amas of kosher schach. So even though you don't have, so because in the middle of the sukkah you have 8 tefachim of kosher schach, and therefore the sukkah is kosher. And so you have doifan akuma. This is what we do. We use, remember, the founding opinion that the middle of the sukkah is 4 tefachim, and we believe in doifan akuma. So you have the doifan akuma till the very center of the sukkah, where you have the last 2 boards are kosher schach boards, not boards, kosher schach you place there. You have 4 tefachim of kosher. Right next to it is another 4 tefachim of kosher. So you have a total of 8 tefachim of kosher. And then all around that, you'll use doifan akuma, and therefore you have a kosher sukkah.
Is that lamaisa?
Yeah. We paskin doifan akuma, but I'll just tell you an interesting machlek is Rashi and others.
We paskin is 3 amas or 4 amas?
No, doifan akuma is 4 amas. 4. The yoy, this is what we do. You put in neser, 1 pasel board that has like kosher schach. Neser pasel kosher schach. Neser pasel schach. So you have 6 different layers. Each one is 4 tefachim. That's 24 tefachim. So that is the equivalent of 4 amas on the right side, and mahagisa on this side. And then you start from the other wall, the Nesser of Pesel, the Pesel. So the Pesel again, you have 2 psalim now, 4 lots of 4 tefachim of kosher schach right in the middle. Mahagisa. The Havale Shnei psalim be'emtza. So now you have 2 sets of kosher schach. Each one is 4 tefachim. Together, there's 8. The ika hechsha sukkah be'emtza, and you have a kosher sukkah right in the middle, where you have an interesting argument because Rashi seems to clearly say here, and you need to understand the logic behind it. So Rashi, let's see. So you have right in the middle, you have 8 tvachim of kosher schach, and right next to that you have 4 tvachim on your right, 4 tvachim on the left of puzzle, and then you have 4 tvachim on the right, 4 tvachim on the left kosher. Rashi says you're allowed to sit under all the kosher schachs all the way to the actual wall. In other words, when we say that the rest of the sukkah is puzzle, it means under the puzzle schach you cannot sit and eat, but under the kosher schach you could.
Then it's not doif and akuma. It's doif and akuma.
So it's very hard to understand what Rashi is saying, but that's what Rashi clearly says here. Look at Rashi, you'll see. So it's very hard to understand because if we say doif and akuma, if it's doif and akuma, how can you sit?
Which
the only way to understand it is that Rashi changes his mind, and that doif and akuma doesn't mean the schach becomes the wall. The schach remains schach, but the walls move in. So if the walls move in, and it's like walls are an angle, and in other words, the wall, the bottom of the wall moves into here. Somehow or another, it goes to the schach, and then you're sitting outside like pesel hayotzei, and therefore maybe you can sit under the schach. Rashi needs an explanation. Rashi
you can't sit under dof and akuma.
Exactly. That's if you learn doif and akuma means that the wall, that the schach becomes part of the wall. There's another pshat in Rashi, which most Rishonim, Rashi discounts, but most Rishonim had the version of Rashi like the pshat he rejects, not the Rashi that we have, which clearly means there were different Rashis, that the Rashi wrote different versions, and we'll assume that we have the later one and they had the early one. But all the Rishonim, when they quote Rashi that doif and akuma does not mean the way we learned till now, that the schach becomes a wall. They learn that the walls move in. The schach remains schach. The walls move in to where the kosher schach is, and therefore you have your walls. So based on that, maybe we can explain a little bit why you can sit outside of those walls and sit under the schach, because that's the concept of pesel, which you learn in 2 days' time.
So what's it, the Maisa, if you've got someone who's got dof and akuma, can you sit under the dof and akuma?
No, definitely not.
Because it's a wall. It's part of the wall.
We paskin that as part of the wall. That's exactly right. But these are all important dinim because we all build sukkahs, so it's good to know what makes a sukkah kosher and what's not. Okay, so